coming up.
And then he went, and he said it was the most terrifying thing that he had ever experienced, because in the night there were like screams, there's weird noises. It's the middle of nowhere, so there shouldn't be anything. And he said that you could see with a flashlight that there were footprints in the dust on the ceiling. And he's like, why are they there? Like bare feet and hands.
Welcome to Unholy Vibes, a journey through the realms of true horror. Although not a religious podcast, our guests may present stories intertwined with personal faiths and beliefs to maintain authenticity. We welcome guests from various spiritual backgrounds, acknowledging the impact of their beliefs on their experiences. Thank you for joining. Let's dive in with an open mind and respect for all perspectives. Welcome to the Unholy Vibes podcast. My name is Alex, your host. And today we have a special guest with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Hailey Fuller. I'm a historian. My background is in ancient demonology and witchcraft, which is super weird and not really something that there's a big calling for, it seems. So I'm so excited to actually get to talk about spooky stuff and this stuff, because no one ever wants to talk about it with me. So that's really, really exciting. I've been a lot of things. I was a museum curator. I was a history professor. I was a middle school teacher, and I'm still in education, but no one ever wants to talk about all that spooky stuff. I tried to talk about our bathroom at work being haunted, and nobody wanted to talk about that at all. So
I need to know more about the haunted bathroom. So we actually were introduced to each other through a mutual friend, Sarah Dubiz. She's a friend of mine and a friend of the show. She's actually appeared on the Weeb and the Cash podcast, which I'm also a part of, a couple times. And Sarah's awesome. So it was super cool. One day she just goes, hey, I have someone who might be great for your new show. I said, great. Send me your Instagram. And I added you, started messaging you, and here we are. It all worked out, you know? So props to Sarah. Thank you to Sarah. And Sarah, again, is just very cool. So we could talk all day about how cool Sarah is and all that. But let's talk about you, Hailey. So tell us how you got in. Tell us the whole story. How did you get into ancient demonology?
So I was a history major. That was just what I wanted to do. And I had this awesome British guy who was my ancient Greek historian. That he's the one that I took all my classes from as an undergrad. But I really didn't think that that was something that I could continue to do. So I was like, obviously I have to do something that's a little bit more marketable, right? So I was like, okay, I'll do World War II history. And I was really fascinated by the history of the Holocaust and gender. And so that's what I did my undergrad work on. And I was going to continue to do that in grad school too. But then I took another ancient history class because I needed an elective. And of course, it was the same guy. And all of a sudden, he started talking about ancient demons. And I was just like, what? There are books on that? And of course, he's looking at me when I go to his office and asking him this question. Like, obviously, there are books on ancient demons, there's books on everything. And so I remember asking him kind of casually, because I didn't want to seem like too weird and too crazy. So I was just like, so if someone wanted to study demons in the ancient world, they could do that. And he's looking at me like he already knows that that's what I'm asking. And he's just like, yes, you could. There are plenty of sources out there. So I kind of teased it for a little while. And then finally I was like, no, that's what I want to do. So I remember going to his office and just being like, okay, I'm switching my major focus and I want to do ancient demonology. Can that be a thing? And he was like, yes, that can be a thing. So from that point on, it was just like all demons all the time. And I was doing comparative religious history. So I was working on ancient demonology, but then I was also working on the Salem witch trials. And so I did a lot of work with colonial America, looking at the Salem witch trials, but then also the other ones that were kind of happening at the same time. Because there was one that happened in 1692 in Connecticut that very few people talk about. And then there were some other examples in the earlier 1680s that were going on at the same time. So I was kind of looking at both of those because they were both kind of about demons, both kind of about possession, and just looking at how they shape our popular culture. I love horror movies and I love like those types of horror movies. So it was kind of like that. Where does this come from? And how did we get to where we are today with these things that didn't really start off being so bad?
Right. So you got into this, you studied this, you changed your whole course. As you studied ancient demonology, how ancient are we talking? Are we talking just like around like the witch trials? Are we going even farther back? How far
So
back did you
I
go
was
into demonology?
So I was looking back at ancient Greece and Rome. So in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, they both have these ideas of what's known as and forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, it's been a decade since I was like entrenched in the libraries, but you had the daemon, right? So it's Daimon. And you have this entity, right, that is not quite what we know today, but it's not like what we know today, right? So when I was doing my research, I was like, so a lot of people think that the demon itself is something that just comes from the ancient world. Like it comes from the ancient world and all of a sudden it's into like early Christianity and into monotheistic religion and it's just always been the same. But if we look back further into ancient Greece, you see that there's a lot of discrepancy there, and it's not necessarily exactly as we see today. So, in the ancient world, you have these ideas of yes, there's good and evil, but like the gods, they're not wholly good. They're not wholly evil, right? They are
Okay.
just like everybody else. They just happen to be immortal and they just happen to live on Mount Olympus, right? They do all the things that we like to do and they do all the things that we know we shouldn't do. So you have the one of the first instances of discussion of demons is actually in Homer's Iliad, and it talks about it as an action or like an intermediary. And so that's what I found really interesting is this idea that the demon isn't this evil entity, it's more like this little helper guy. So a lot of the ancient world would refer to these demons as being like spirits that were so like Socrates, for example. He believed that there was this like thing that he referred to as a demon that he was born with that just followed him and guided him. And so a lot of people also had this same idea that this was like a guardian. So not this like bad thing, right? It's something
Yeah.
that's actually watching over you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in a good way, but also not in a bad way.
It's just there kind of or what?
It's just there, right? And maybe it's influencing you a little bit, but not possession, right? It's not like it's getting in there and doing all sorts of terrible things, like in The Exorcist or something.
Yeah.
So we also see so there's two different forms of religion in the ancient world. You have public religion and you have private religion. And so the public religion is really like the festivals that we see that's devoted to the festival for Zeus or something, where they've got sacrifices, games, and all that. And then you have private forms of religion, which could be something like mystery cults, or it could be like what you do at home. And at home, it could be something that is devoted to your household god, or it could be something that's a little bit more secretive. So, with the household gods, what's really interesting is that in ancient Greece, you have this entity that's known as the, again, forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, the Agathos demon, which is just like literally good demon or like good demon of the household. And in ancient Rome, you have the Lars, which are kind of the same thing, or the genius, which are kind of the same thing. And they basically are these little household entities that you would give food and drink to and you would worship in
Hmm.
your home. They're not quite gods, but they're obviously not human either, so they're like spirits.
Something in between.
And yeah, so it's like this little thing, and they're known as like these little intermediaries. And then you also have these ideas of demons being out there as entities that are used to explain things that we don't quite understand ourselves. So you would have maybe somebody referring to demons to like a pestilence or a famine or a drought or something because they don't understand where it's coming from and they don't know who to blame.
Right. Can't explain it, must be demons, must be witches, you know?
Yes. Exactly. And so that's what I found so fascinating about it was it's like you have all these different ideas and historians look back on them and they don't quite know how to categorize these things. They're like, okay, well, we see demons used to talk about feelings and the personification of feelings. It's like hope and fear or love or something like that. Or we see it as an intermediary that goes between, and that's my favorite because that's when you got to see the spells and stuff, which I'll talk about that in a minute because that in
Yeah,
itself is
yeah,
just
okay.
bizarre and so fascinating. But even if we think about the famous Pandora's box story, she opens up the box she's not supposed
Yeah.
to, and then all that stuff gets released. even there, the things that get released, if you watch movies or, cartoon versions of it or whatever, there's always things coming out of the box that look really scary. And I think that we tend to just like automatically, maybe unconsciously, just assume that obviously this is supposed to be evil and demonic. But in Greek, in ancient Greek, the things that got released were just illnesses. That's what the word was. It was the word for illness. So it wasn't
Hmm.
demons at all. So the fact that they don't actually, and I know this is a lot of semantics, but the fact that they don't actually refer to it as demons leads historians to believe, like, okay, so we aren't associating those two things. The demons of the time and the pestilence and illness that's coming out of Pandora's box, that doesn't actually go together, which I thought was really interesting. Because again, we just have this idea that they were all evil all the time.
Right. Right. That is very fascinating. It's again going back to how do you explain a famine or a sickness or a pestilence? Just call it a demon. It's almost like it
Exactly.
was a generic term, like a blanket term. Maybe?
Well, and what was really fascinating to me too, and just to kind of go into that a little bit more, was that when you're looking at a lot of these texts, there isn't this like possession as we would know with our pop culture demons and with things that happened in Salem or whatever, not Salem specifically, but in other parts of this history that we're talking about. But there is one case where that does happen. And this actually comes a little bit later. It's Rome. And it is around the time that you start to see the rise of Christianity, and you've already seen Judaism. And that, and that's a really gendered experience. It's only women who will experience this because it was this idea, and it's so wild. I used to talk about this in my classes, and everyone was just stunned. It was this idea called the wandering womb, and it was basically
What the heck?
yes, it's exactly what you're thinking. So, basically, the idea was to explain any sort of, like, emotion or quote unquote "hysteria" that was being experienced by a woman. They would explain it as a demon had possessed her uterus and it was wandering around her body. Yes.
Sounds right. Yeah, okay.
Right, totally. It seems legit. And this is
Oh
this
my.
the sad thing is that this actually this idea, not so much Wandering Womb itself, but the echoes of the Wandering Womb will continue all the way up until the 20th century, no joke.
Wow.
Because obviously, right.
Well, yeah,
So
hysteria. You know what? Just lobotomize them. That they're, if they talk too much
exactly.
or whatever.
Or my most favorite cure for that in the late 1800s was you just treat them like a baby and you just swaddle them, and the poor woman gets swaddled for like 3 months and gets fed a milk-based diet in order to revert back to childhood, which
What the
I
hell?
yeah, bizarre,
I'm learning
bizarre,
so much.
but
I love this. This is great.
but that traces all the way back to this wandering womb. And then you also see this fear that young girls who reached puberty, the reason why they had reached puberty, they claimed was because they had been basically deflowered by a demon. And so you see this totally gendered experience to explain just changes that are happening with women's bodies by the use of possession. But again, this comes a lot later where we've already seen like influences of monotheistic religion in ancient Rome. But that's one of my favorites
Oh.
because it's just so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, just with women too.
Mhm.
Wow, that's wild.
Well, and we see too this idea of the use of magic, and because religion and magic, they have really blurry lines in the ancient world. So there's, again, like I said, public and private religion. You have accepted religious practices, and then you have those that are considered magic. And there's a lot of debate with historians as to what actually constituted magic and what constituted religion.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you look back at some ancient religion, there's a lot of overlap there. And so some groups would utilize what we would consider to be magic, and they would just like umbrella it under their religious practices. So like the ancient Israelites who used the casting of lots, there would be justification for the use of that type of magic through like biblical reference. And you see that a lot with other ancient religious practices too. If they veered too much into magic, they would be like, no, 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 it's fine because this falls under, like this aspect of our accepted religious practice. But one of the things that we do see is that the use of magic ends up getting tied to things that were seen as quote foreign or wanted to be quote othered, and then you tend to see that end up being feminized, and they make it so that it's not an attractive practice for men in this society.
Interesting.
It's fascinating.
I'm fascinated, that's for sure. Maybe I should go to college and study ancient demonology. It's just all this is so fascinating, and I I never knew about the wandering womb, and the fact that they'd be like, "Just wrap her up, just swaddle her like a baby, no big deal."
Well, and in the ancient world, so in ancient Rome, the cure was a little different. Their thought was that obviously the uterus could smell. So if it's up messing with your brain, you should put really gross smelling stuff up by her face. And then you should put perfume down by her legs to kind of lure it back down where it belongs.
Interesting.
Because, obviously that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, makes sense to me. And you know, it's kind of funny, and I say this just like in a joking way, but maybe we ought to bring back the idea of whenever anything happens to someone biologically, to be like, yeah, it's just demons. Like, don't worry about it. It's
Yes,
just the
it's
puberty
totally just
demon.
Yes, exactly. No, my students used to joke about that after they would hear it because they were like, "This is the wildest thing I've ever heard." And it's so profoundly offensive, especially when you get into the 20th century that you're like, they still thought this about my body, that it's funny because you're just like, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, you have to just make fun of it and laugh at it,
Mhm.
I think. And because, like, looking back now, you're just like, "What? What in the world? Okay,
The
okay."
The other part that I think is really weird and funny about this is that the spells. So that was one of the coolest things that I got to do was like look at ancient spell books that had been translated because I am not good with ancient Greek, but the translations were great. And one of the things that was really interesting was you had these quote voodoo dolls, but then you also had these like binding spells or these binding curses, and this kind of goes back to this idea of that demon is like your helper, just
Mm.
like some guy that you call to help you do things and maybe isn't too happy about it. Because there's this idea that comes from this one work called Works and Days, and it basically took this idea that during this like golden age, you had this race of men that was created. They were godlike. They were, they were these wonderful, wonderful groups of people. But then they die out, and as they die out, they become these spirits and these like intermediaries. And so a lot of people were like, "Oh, obviously they mean that they became demons." And so you have this idea that they were there to help you and do the things that you wanted them to do. And so these binding curses, I even because I was going through some of my stuff and I was like, what are some of the weird ones that there were that I had found? And one of my favorite ones was from this guy. He basically the idea that we get from this spell is that he was in love with this courtesan or this satyre who would have been a woman who was an escort that was like a highly educated, like they would go with these men to go and talk about like politics and philosophy and things like that. So it seems like he may have fallen in love with her, but then this like buff boxer came and took her away because it's like referred to as like this athlete, right? And so he calls upon all of these things. He's like, I'm sending a letter to the daemons and to Persephone and deliver to them this woman who did me wrong. And that's what it says. And it's like on this tablet, and he's basically he's calling to Persephone too, and he's calling to demons, and he's like, you have to go and you have to bring her to me, and she has to love me, and she can't be in love with this other like athletic guy.
What a simp.
So, I mean, right. The ancient world, they had the same problems, right? They had the same same problems.
Oh, man, that's funny.
But they're so funny because I remember reading this one book and it was like the spellcasters here are and they're taking it so seriously. Like you can tell from the from the tablets and from the spells that they're reading and writing, that they're taking it so seriously. And you're like, what was it like for the person on the receiving end of that? Because they're just going about their day. They're just going about their business and they have no idea that this guy over here is just like raging
Yeah. Yeah.
about the
Well, this is kind of where I want to dive into some speculation and your thoughts. Everyone has different belief systems, right? I'm a religious person, and I think there's power in belief personally. And a lot of other people, other religions or practices would agree and say they call it something, you know? And I look at things like this guy's real upset about his gal leaving him, and he writes an angry tablet. Did it do anything? I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe. They all obviously here's the thing. It seems like culturally they may have all been on a similar page, right? They're all like, "Yeah, we have demons and you can just ask them for help and they're your little guys." But is there any merit to that, or is it just like, nah, it's just a whole country civilization, just group delusion or something? What do you think? Speculate with me.
With this story and with some of the other ones, the majority of them are all like love spells, right?
Hmm.
So it's so hard to say like what would have happened. Like would this woman have realized like she would have gone off with this athlete and then been like, you know what, this guy sucks, I really want to be with this guy, you know? And so is he gonna then think that his demon like helped him and brought him this woman,
Yeah.
right? Because she may just be like, you know what, I made a bad choice, this guy is not the guy for me, but he's going to be thinking it was totally the demon and Persephone that helped bring this woman back to me.
And who's to say he was wrong? Do we know the end of the story? Did
Exactly.
she go back to him? I don't know.
We have no idea, and who knows? I mean, it is kind of fun to think about these, like, little I don't know, I always think of the little, like, guys from Hercules, you know, the Disney Hercules.
Yeah.
That's, like, what pops into my mind when I think about these guys, and so it's just like, just imagine you need something, you invoke these little fellas that come up and just go and do your bidding, and
Yeah.
maybe the other person sees them, maybe they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. We weren't there. We weren't there. But I like to think about those kind of things because talking more modern, I don't know how much you're into like modern like Santeria or witches or things like
Mhm.
that. I have stories from my grandmother, just some things that are like, how, you know? I'm kind of like stuttering around this because I'm trying to think of a specific word and it's not coming to my mind, but thinking more modern, look at like witches and people who have belief in witches and not I don't mean Wiccan. I mean like brujas, like a freaking
Mhm.
Mexican
Mhm.
witch, dude. And I've heard stories from people I know, from family, from friends, and then you hear your odd scary podcast and people telling their stories there and you just think, wow, they sacrificed a chicken and buried it under the person's porch and it worked. That person's now sick and dying, and they had to go and find the witch and beg her to break the curse, and then she did, and then they got better. Like, what? You know what I mean? So I look at
Yeah.
that and I'm like, that's this, but it's also kind of who's to say it was any different from this ancient stuff, you know? And again, I don't know your beliefs and your belief system. What do you think? Do you think it's all just coincidence, happenstance? Are you more of like a are you religious at all? Or you have any sort of, religion?
I grew up in a family where we had some of everything. I mean, my family's Jewish, they're Catholic, we've got atheists, we've got pagans. So I grew up with kind of a combo can, if you will,
Melting
of all
pot.
of these.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I myself, I don't know, I consider myself to be more spiritual, and how cliche is that, right? More spiritual
That's
than
yeah.
religious, but I truly do believe that there's stuff out there that cannot be explained. Like you were talking about with Brujas, and we used to go to New Orleans all the time. And part of what I was studying toward the end of my grad career was voodoo, Santeria, hoodoo, root work, all of that. And so, I mean, the stuff that I read on that and the people that I encountered, just practitioners, I mean, it's really, I know for me, it's hard to discount those things. because I can't explain it. And if you truly believe that you were able to sacrifice a chicken and it caused someone to get sick, who am I to say that that was not what happened?
Yeah.
Especially if, I mean, because sometimes you see these things and it's just like, that's way too coincidental
Yeah.
to just be like, oh yeah, this dude got sick
Yeah.
at the same time that this happened, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that specific example is from another thing I heard, not one that I knew personally, but I do have friends that served church missions in other countries. And I've got family members again that have their own personal stories. And in a lot of Christian belief systems, you would say faith precedes miracles, right? So you have to have faith to make a miracle happen. And the more I got into like spooky stuff and hearing all these stories, I think, how does, and it's crazy to me, and again, I could be way off base here. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know more than I do. Again, I just full disclaimer, I don't know everything. There's so much I don't know, right? But just from what I do know, how is it that when you go to somewhere in South America or in Mexico, their belief is so strong, whether it's in Christianity or like being Catholic, a lot of Catholicism, right? But then they tie their Christianity sometimes to, I don't even know how you call it, paganism or like
Hmm.
Santeria or whatever, but they tie it,
Occultism?
yeah, they tie it into, well, yes, we believe in Jesus and the Mother Mary and all that, but also we could go down to our local Bruja and hire her to do some dirty work for us. It's interesting to me how they reconcile and how they are able to say these both can do things. Like these both can
Yes.
exist in the same space.
Well, and so much of it comes from just that colonial history of European powers coming in and this conversion, right? A lot of it forced, some of it, but a lot of it forced. But when you have these communities that have this completely different worldview brought in by European colonizers, that they then have to reconcile it. And often it's not allowed to be reconciled, right? By those who have come in, whether it's conquistadors, whether it's British colonists, who knows.
Right.
But you have these pockets that are trying desperately to hang on to those traditions, or like in the case of voodoo in the United States South, you have this incredible combination of traditional African practices that are brought over with the slave trade. And that is how they're surviving, right? They're combining these religious views through syncretism to create these incredible life-saving cultures that have continued on to this day through things like voodoo,
Right.
Santeria, and all of these other indigenous religions that have continued on by mixing themselves with Catholicism or Protestantism. And it's fascinating.
And so essentially you're saying like they hold on to what they can of their culture and it manifests as this, as what it could be a few different things, and it now turns into modern day voodoo, Santeria, whatever it may be. I think that's interesting. I think that's very interesting. And I going back to, I'm all over the place. Sorry, I'm like scatterbrained.
That's okay. There's
What?
so much to talk about.
Oh yeah, so much. In the thought that I was saying, faith precedes miracles. I think that, again, I'm thinking South America, Mexico, and then South America, more Latin-based cultures. It's still faith, but I think it's almost, you would call it superstition, right? And I think faith and superstition are two sides of the same coin. Strong belief. And I
Hmm.
think faith precedes a miracle. You need faith to see something miraculous happen from in a religious lens, but then you got a lot of superstition or faith, the other side of faith, to see something a little spookier happen. And I don't know what the opposite of a, not opposite, but the flip side of a miracle is. Is that you know, I don't know. I don't know. A spooky miracle, you know? Uh
A spooky miracle. I like that.
yeah, like how much superstition or faith do you have to have to, I'm going to give you an example. This is a story from my family, okay? And this happened to my grandpa who actually passed away before I was born. But I'd heard this story many times growing up from my grandma, from my dad, so on and so forth. So years ago, my grandpa lived in whatever neighborhood. I don't know if they were in Washington at the time or who knows? Who cares, right? My grandpa's walking down the street of his neighborhood, and it's a very Mexican community. Oh, side note, I'm Mexican by blood. So my grandpa was full-blooded Mexican, and they were in a very Mexican community where they're living, and he's walking down the street one day, just kind of going on a walk on the sidewalk or on the street, whatever. And he looks over and sees people outside, and there's kids playing and whatnot. And he looks at this kid and just I don't even know what he did, but he just gave a glance to this kid. And I from everything I've been told, my grandpa was kind of a grumpy dude, kind of ornery, swore under his breath a lot, like just like an old grumpy dude. And he keeps going down the block, and then someone runs after him. And they're running after him, and they're like, "Hey, mister, stop, stop, stop. Like, you have to come help us. You gave my little brother the evil eye." And have you heard of the evil eye?
Mhm.
Yes, yes, it's out there. And they're telling him, "You gave him the evil eye." And this is all in Spanish, of course, but I'm not even gonna try because 'cause I'm not. Yeah, yeah. So they get him to go back, and they're like, "You have to help." And what they did, which you probably know already, they got a chicken egg and they rubbed the chicken egg all over this boy's body, this kid's body, and then they cracked it and it was bloody inside. What's that all about?
Right? Okay, I had a student who had the same thing happen. She
Ugh.
she was sick. There was something going on with her. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she told me that her mother took her to a healer. This was when I was living in Texas, and
Oh,
she did the same thing with the egg. She ran it over her whole entire body, and when they opened it up, it was just black inside. And so
jeez.
it's the same thing. Like, okay, first of all, you can't see inside an egg, right? So it's not like if you were trying to scam somebody, you could be like, haha, I've got my bloody egg here and I've got my black egg here. So I'm just going to use these bad boys and they're not going to know. How would you know?
Listen, anyone will say there's a million different ways or reasons or whatever, but dude, I'm talking like this is in the 50s. And like I've met other people. It's funny enough, the very first guest I had on this show, episode 1, her name is Taylor. She actually did a study on this in college and wrote a paper about the evil eye. Anyway, if I remember correctly. But I've had multiple people, multiple places throughout my life talk about the evil eye or even just the practice of rubbing the egg and having that crack it open and there goes your sickness or your evil or your demon or whatever. And it kind of relates back in a way. Pandora's box you brought up. They called them demons, but it was really just a pestilence or a sickness. But it could a sickness be considered a demon still to this day? Sure, I don't know. I don't know. Whatever. We could go every which way. But to me, I hear those stories and I'm like, it's too many times to just discredit entirely, you know? And a lot of people, especially in the United States, are skeptics. We're a skeptical nation. That just is. I think North America, for the 2/3 of North America are very skeptical. Where you and I'm not meaning any offense by that to either
No, I
Canada
think
or
you're absolutely
US
right.
or Mexico. And I lived in Mexico for a while and it just is. It just is. And being skeptical doesn't make you smarter, in my opinion. And having this belief and these strong beliefs doesn't make you dumb. But I think a lot of people, especially in, I'll just say the US, think that way. They're skeptical and they think that if you believe differently, like it's dumb to think that an egg needs to be rubbed all over your body. But hey, it obviously has been working for a while.
Right?
But if I were to, let's say my son, I have a 3-year-old. Let's say he gets really sick or whatever happens to him, and I couldn't take that egg and I couldn't take any egg and rub it on him and crack it and expect anything because that's not I don't even have an ounce of that in me. I just even though I know other people do and other people have experienced that, I don't think it would work for me. Is that a lack of faith or superstition? Does it prove that it's not real just because I can't do it? I don't think so.
No,
No. Anyway,
I don't think so.
so long ass tangent rant there, so I apologize, but I just think it's very interesting because different cultures have their things that from all we can tell, they're working. They're doing it.
Well, yeah. If we think about like folk magic and folk remedies and things that got brought over, I mean, even like folk magic, like my family's from Wales, and so there's a lot of like folk magic, folk stuff. Like my mom, for example, she does all sorts of stuff with herbs. She would be the last to tell you that it had anything to do with magic or like folk remedy or anything like that, because she'd be like, absolutely not. I don't touch that stuff. I'm like,
It's science,
you're making
even if it's holistic, that's still, it's herbs, it's
yeah,
science,
so she's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, really? Because that came from your grandma, but whatever. You know, so these kinds of things that get brought over that people, well, I mean, people used to look down on them. Now we kind of have like through new agey movements, they're starting to, become more accepted. But
There's been
those
a
were kind of the
renaissance
reason.
of there's been an absolute renaissance of holistic things,
Exactly.
especially
And
in the
those are the
States.
kinds of things that people would have been getting in trouble for in early America and being like labeled a witch,
You'd get burned at the
and in
stake for
Europe.
that, yeah.
Exactly, like my mom making her little dream pillow, like, "Watch out, they're coming for you." So, it's really interesting to see, and of course, there's a lot of stuff to say about, like, well, where are these folk things coming from? Are they coming from Europe, or are they coming from other parts of the world, and what's accepted and what comes into, like, these new age movements that's seen as okay and what's not, but that's a totally different conversation on a totally different kind of thing. But it's really interesting to see, like, what's what what's coming back, like, what are the kinds of things that you start to see more of that is accepted in society and seen, yeah, like you're saying, it's totally okay for me to do this kind of folk practice, and it's not going to make me seem superstitious or quote dumb, but if I do this, I'm going to be seen as not intelligent.
I find that fascinating because you're absolutely right. It's like, oh, my thing is okay, but yours is
Mhm.
weird. I just find it fascinating. I find it all fascinating, and I could talk about it for days, obviously. But tell me more. You studied, you got into modern stuff more like you're and into voodoo, you said, other things like that. What took you from, okay, Greece, witch trials, voodoo? What drew that path? What drew you towards one specific cult or practice or whatever? What was the driving force? What intrigued you about it?
So when it came to the ancient world, like seeing where the demon like makes its change, and its change comes with Saint Augustine, and Saint Augustine basically says anything that came from a religion before, including those spirits, right? They're demons. They're bad, right? So that's where we see this major change. And so after that, the demon is all bad all the time. There's no helper, like the only helper he is Satan's helper, right? He's not going to be like helping you with your little love spells and things like that. He's coming to possess.
If it's
So,
not of God, it's of the devil, basically.
exactly, exactly. So, what I thought was really interesting was then looking at the colonial world. So, I was always obsessed with Salem when I was a kid because I thought that was really interesting, and I used to read all the little kid books that they had on Salem. And I had read a book as an undergrad about some of the theories that they had for why Salem happened. And one of them was just basically, it was called ergot poisoning. And it was like this mold that got into the grain. And basically, they said that it was giving people hallucinations and things like that. It's been a thoroughly debunked theory, which is unfortunate because it's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah.
But I was like, all right, let's see a little further and see what's up with Salem. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is that Salem is not the only time that this happens in colonial America. You hear about the witch hunts in Europe and how extensive they were, but you don't hear about what's going on in the colonies in America. So in 1692, there was another witch trial that happened at the same time in Connecticut. So not in Massachusetts, but in Stamford. And what happened there was you had a girl who basically was saying the same kinds of things. She was saying that there was a witch, that the witches were tormenting her, and that they obviously the same kind of things that they were saying in Salem. So what they did was they had these tests. So there are all sorts of tests that they had in Salem to check if you were a witch. Spoiler alert, none of them were like really very good. It was all like, do you have a mole or a beauty mark? Obviously, you're a witch. If you could recite the Lord's Prayer, you weren't a witch until they made this one guy, I can't remember off the top of my head what his name was. It was one of the only men who was accused during Salem. He had escaped. They brought him back. Cotton Mather, the got preacher there who's like in charge of all the religious aspects of this, is like, say the Lord's Prayer. The guy says the Lord's Prayer, and he's like, that doesn't mean anything. Even a witch could say the Lord's Prayer. So, like, well, that one's out the window. There was like, do you have a pet? If you have a pet, you're a witch. But my favorite one was called ducking. So they kind of do this in Monty Python and
Oh my
Holy
gosh.
Grail.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where it's like you'd see if she floats. So they did this. They didn't do this in Salem, but they did this in Connecticut. And they did ducking and both women floated and they were like, so obviously you're witches because if you weren't, you would sink. What's
Which
interesting
makes
about
no sense.
doesn't make any sense. It's like if she weighs as much as a duck, right? It's ridiculous. So both of the women, there were two, maybe there were three. They were acquitted. There was a lot of because of the controversies that were going on in Salem at the time. You see a lot of this, a lot of similar stuff happening there. So they get acquitted, but they will be treated with suspicion their whole entire lives. In Salem, you have, if you admit that you're a witch, then you'll be forgiven. But if you don't admit that you're a witch, then you're going to be hanged. And for Puritans, if you were to say, yes, I'm a witch, knowing full well you weren't a witch and you hadn't signed the devil's book, that's worse than being a witch. So you're not going to do that. So many people get impacted by Salem. And then, of course, there's the whoops, we did a bad thing apology that comes a few years later, which is a little too little too late. But what was really interesting to me, to get back to your question, is that you have this dude, Cotton Mather, right, who's a really famous preacher, son of an even more famous guy, Increase Mather. The names back then were so fascinating. Increase and Cotton. So they
Oh
were so
man.
good, right? So when he goes around, because there's another one in 1688, and I can't remember where it is, but it's a possession of the Goodwin children. And when he goes, one of the things that he has to figure out is whether this is possession or obsession. And I found that so fascinating because just imagine like going around and people are like, there's something weird happening to my children. And you have to figure out, are you being possessed by a demon or are you being obsessed by a witch? Because possession is internal. It means that something got into you and is influencing your actions. And obsession means that there's something external that is tormenting you.
Right.
So in the case of Salem, it was, quote, obsession by a witch, whereas the Goodwin children, Cotton Mather, deemed it that it was, in fact, possession. It's so wild to think, especially that there was just like one person, well, two, including his dad, that got to have this determination. Like, you call Cotton, he comes and he's like, you're obsessed. There's a witch coming and she's after you. And by the way, the only evidence we need is the evidence you can see that no one else can.
A lot of power for one person to have.
Right?
Because they can
So
go in
that
and
was
just
just,
wreck a village or whatever and just ruin
Mhm.
some lives.
No, it's
Yeesh.
it's absolutely wild. And of course, there's so much going on and Salem is fascinating because there's all sorts of different reasons as to why this could have happened. It was just like Salem Village was just waiting for a disaster with all of the tension that was there. But it was able to be taken advantage of quickly by people who thought that they knew what was going on
Mm.
with demons. And a lot of this, of course, is coming from this fear that a lot of religious leaders had in the colonies that people just weren't religious enough. So they were trying to come up with ways to prove that people needed to get back on track and get back on that path. So they considered this to be experimental evidence that they could use to then prove to people that they needed to get right with God because otherwise these things were going to happen. Of course, after Salem, you don't see that anymore so much because Salem's really the last big one because it was such a big blunder and everyone got in a
Yeah.
lot of heat for that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It always makes me think of the movie The Witch, The Witch.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
I dislike I mean, I like that movie, but I strongly dislike it, you know? Even though
I
that's
used to show that in class
Whoa, what?
because it's like it's Oh, yeah, no, 'cause, when we were talking
In
about
middle
Salem because
school?
no, 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 when I taught college, when I taught
Oh,
college.
I was like, "Bro."
My poor middle schoolers, they'd be scarred, they could barely make it through Lord of the Rings.
I was like, "Oh my gosh." I
We
literally
used
thought
to
you were talking about your middle schoolers. Like, "What did you do?"
their parents would have murdered me. But it's such an excellent depiction of what Puritan life was like. It is bleak. There is not a lot out there, and you are scared all the time. You are scared that you're doing something wrong, that God is going to damn you to hell. You're scared because you truly believe that Satan's out in those woods coming to get you. And you're terrified because you have groups of indigenous people who are pissed off that you have taken their land. And so there's all of these wars that are going on at the same time. So it's such an excellent depiction of that. And it's also just an excellent depiction of how you have this ability of one person to just plant that seed that something evil is going on, and then all of a sudden it just
Hysteria.
snowballs, right?
Mass
Because it's
hysteria.
those brats, it's those bratty twins who they just are angry at their sister. Like I always told them, have you ever just like lied to your sibling to, like get them scared or to get them away from you? That's what happens here. And she's just like, yeah, I'm the witch. And then all of a sudden they're mad at her, they know they can get revenge, and voila, perfect storm.
Kids. I have a whole story that kinda relates to the witch. Well, it's more of just my dislike for goats. I don't like goats.
Oh.
And it really started with the witch, or at least it was, finalized with the witch, I should say, because never really loved them. But we won't get into that right now. There's a whole story behind it. It's its own episode. You'll have to hear. I wanna tell you now because it's a crazy anyway, jumping back and forth, coming back into modern stuff, or just your studies in general. When do you, if at all, when do you think that during your studies, things went from ancient Greece, kinda like fun, whimsical, just kinda there to being like, "This is actually kinda spooky now." Did you ever start studying something or dive into something or read something where you're like, "This makes me feel unholy vibes, makes me feel icky."
So, when I was in grad school, I tried to get permission to actually go to some exorcisms because
Ooh,
there are some people in the area. I mean, they're obviously not sanctioned exorcisms by the Catholic Church by any means, since they don't really do that anymore. But yeah, well, and as I told you before we were chatting, I had a friend who was dating a guy who then decided that he was gonna become a priest, and so they were still friends after that, and he went to and we had been kinda chatting because he knew that I was interested in this. This was before grad school, but still interested in demons, and he told me that in order to, like, fulfill something, I can't remember what requirement it was for priesthood, but they had to go to this ghost town out in the middle of nowhere. We were in Vegas, so it was out in the middle of the desert, and they had to spend the night in this horrifyingly creepy house. It was a building of some kind. I don't remember what it was, but I remember that he was just like, whatever, it's not going to be a big deal. Stayed the night in creepy places before.
yeah.
And then he went and he said it was the most terrifying thing that he had ever experienced because in the night there were like screams, there's weird noises. It's the middle of nowhere, so there shouldn't be anything. And he said that you could see with a flashlight, because obviously there's no lights, so you're just like flashlighting it, that there were footprints in the dust on the ceiling. And he's like, why are they there? Like
Yeah.
bare feet and hands. And so he was telling me this. And so, when you're in the moment and you're listening and you're like, what, right, whatever. But then the more you dwell on it, the more you're like, well, why would they send you out there if you're going to become a priest? Like, what was that purpose? This wasn't just like a random,
Was
like,
it just really
sleepover. This
yeah, was
was,
it just really intense hazing, the initiation or what?
right? So that started to get a little scary. And then when I was trying to find some exorcisms to go to see, there was one group, there's this one guy in Arizona who, and this was creepy in just a different way because I'd seen videos of like real life exorcisms and things, and that started to get me a little creeped out. And I was like, okay, because looking at it from the historian's perspective, from the objective perspective, and I was an anthropology minor, so thinking in all of these different ways, I'm thinking of it as this would be a fascinating experience to be able to see to help with my studies. But then the other part of me, when I'm watching these videos, is like, okay, but what if it's a Father Damien instance, and the demon like jumps from that to me, and then I'm screwed. Even though the logical part of my brain that's looking at it from the historian's perspective is like, it's not going to happen. The other part of me is like, but what if it does? And then my mom
What if?
is going to
Yeah.
be like, I told you so. And I'll never hear the end of it in my insane asylum, demonic possessed state. So that was, yeah, I was like, that's not going to happen. But the weird thing about the exorcists that I found was that they were teenage girls.
The
And I don't know if they're still
Exorcist?
around. Mhm.
Okay.
It was this guy in Arizona who was training teenage girls to be exorcists. And that was its own wild thing when I found that out. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I could do so much on this. But alas, I was too embroiled in the ancient world to go into like, what the heck is going on with these teenage exorcists in Arizona?
My parents live in Arizona, so I need all the info you can get me, and I'm gonna go find out.
Right?
That
Right?
is
And no, and I was like,
fascinating.
okay, now that one I might be okay going to see just because I mean, what the heck is going on? There would be
Yeah.
so many different things that I would be like paying attention to. There's no way a demon could just jump in.
From ancient demonology to modern demonology.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. I need to know everything. Y you opened a whole can of worms now. A
I
dude in
don't you want to know more?
Arizona. Yeah.
I don't even know if they're still around, but I remember they had a website and it was like they were seriously dressed like in schoolgirl outfits, like ready to go exorcise demons. And I'm like, what is this?
Hold on.
I didn't know there was, like, a news story on them. I can't remember
I'm
the
looking at
guy's
it right
name.
now.
Oh, did you
3
see it?
Arizona girls claim to cast out demons. Teen exorcists claim to purge demons. That was a long time. That was 11 years ago. This one was
I don't know if he's still training teenage girls to be exorcists or what the purpose was, but I just remember being like, "What is happening?" And there should be a movie about it that I could watch, so I don't have to actually go myself.
yeah.
And
Okay.
that's a rabbit hole you can go down for quite a while.
I'm gonna have to revisit that. Okay, so we've just hit our hour mark. Is there anything that I'm just totally omitting and missing about like your scholastic background? Is there anything we should dive into more when it comes to your education or your studies?
Well, one of the things that I will say when I was going into my studies of voodoo and Santeria
Yes.
and that kind of stuff, I have to say at the time, because this was what, 10, 11 years ago, there wasn't a lot of stuff there on that. In fact, going back to that discussion of what is okay and what's not, when we look at popular culture, a lot of the time, the portrayals of things like voodoo or vodun, those are really negative, right? It's considered to be like on the dark side of the spectrum of magic.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I was doing with my studies was looking at pop culture, and this is what I was planning to continue on doing, but I didn't get a chance to do that. I was looking at pop culture and seeing all of the ways that we see vodun portrayed in pop culture as opposed to like other forms of magic and witchcraft. Luckily, there have been a lot more scholars who have gone in and done that because that really needed to be looked at because Vodun is a perfectly accepted form of spirituality and religion. It is the just merely the product of religious syncretism, like we talked about earlier, Catholicism and traditional African cultures. But because of it being connected to those things, especially in the American South, those are two forms of culture and religion that were extremely looked down upon during early America and through the Civil War. So we see this long history of that being seen as evil and dark, and it's only very recently that we've actually seen portrayals in pop culture where they're looking at it through a different lens. So, like looking at Disney's The Princess and the Frog, for
Mm,
example, you still have a little bit of that with the villain in the film, but it's kind of counterbalanced by some of the other parts of the story and the other spiritual arcs that are in the film.
yeah.
But yeah,
Okay. And what is the difference between voodoo, voodoo, and hoodoo? I don't know.
So Vodun is the tech is the actual term for voodoo. It's the more accepted term for voodoo for those who are actual practitioners. So if you go to Louisiana, if you go to New Orleans, I used to go to New Orleans all the time. When we lived in Texas, that was where I go for spring break. And there are all sorts of shops and temples that you can go to. And there's this great museum there. We used to go all the time. The guy who ran it, he's unfortunately passed away, but he was the kindest, sweetest man, and he has all of these amazing artifacts, and he actually had his familiar, which was this gigantic python, and it was in the museum in an aquarium, and oh my god, it was beautiful. And when we were there, it was actually having babies, and so he was so excited to tell us all about his spiritual python and how it was having babies, and he was just a doll.
That's awesome.
So the difference there that you see, and again, I'm not, this is like completely my forte. So forgive me if I am getting something wrong to those out there who know more about this than I, but hoodoo is more of like the root work. Vodun has more structure, but hoodoo is more like the root work and spells and things like that.
Okay, interesting. The
And
more
there's a
you
lot of
know.
different practitioners in New Orleans. There's a really interesting woman who goes by the name Bloody Mary. She has an amazing ghost tour, one of the most terrifying ghost tours I've ever been on. But she also does hoodoo root work, basically like nights where you just sign up and you pay a fee and then you go out in the swamp and you gather some stuff, which I always thought would be really cool, but I'm really scared of alligators. So
Right. Dang. That's really cool. That's really cool. And so nowadays, do you what do you do for work now? I didn't ask. Are
I'm
you,
still in education. I just work in administration now. So
oh,
very
gotcha.
different, but still at least with students,
Well,
but not as much talk about demons.
I was gonna ask, do you still apply all of your knowledge to with your current job? But
I
administrator,
don't get to
yeah.
as much, but I did bring in my witchcraft in ancient Norway book that I'm in the process of seeing so that I can read a little bit more on that because that I know
Ooh.
nothing about and I'm fascinated by it. So, oh, and I
Yeah,
do have some books
that's
on satanic panic in there as well. So I
Satanic
hope that
Panic
that
is
doesn't turn anybody
fascinating to
off.
me as well. That
It's so fascinating, right? Oh my god.
the the US in the 80s, dude. I mean, what can you say?
Mhm.
Again, I only know so much, but what I do know, I'm like, wow, it might as well have been like another freaking witch hunt. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Maybe not on such a crazy scale of like, hey, we're hanging and burning these people, but there was a
But
lot
yeah,
of
reputations
mhm.
tarnished and just like communities broken. I mean, if you look at the what is the Paradise Lost documentaries, have you seen those? It's like
I
3
don't think
parts
so.
about the oh my gosh, it's the young boys, where were they? Oh, in the mid no, let me see. Okay, because it's if you haven't seen them, they used to be on HBO, and there was a movie made about them called, like, The Devil's Knot. Let me see, Paradise Lost documentary. Okay, it is they were the West Memphis 3. And they were accused of murder and the sexual mutilation of 3, boys as part of an alleged satanic ritual in West Memphis, Arkansas, and it's this horrific story. There's 3 different documentaries on it, and it's completely about satanic panic. It's 1993. These young kids, they are like, they're goth kids. They hang out outside in these industrial places, and then when this happens, everybody just points their fingers at them, even though the evidence does not point to them at all. It actually points to the stepfathers of these young boys. Like every single thing, like you're watching the documentary and you're just like, oh my God, how could this have happened? And then you see how these people are looking at these 3 young goth kids, and everyone's just like, it's obviously a satanic ritual. It's obviously this. And I remember actually as a kid, when would this have been? 1990 1998, we actually I went to this little private school up in Washington, and at the time it was so terrifying because I remember we had a teacher come in and he like gasped and he was like, don't tell the kids this, but we found they claimed that they had found like rocks with satanic script on it in the back. And so they were claiming that there was like a satanic ritual that happened in like the woods behind our field. And so we were all terrified, right? And now looking back on it, you're like, well, what could it have actually been, right? Satanic panic had really taken hold even in the late 90s up there. And of course, that was also the time of the beginnings of Harry Potter and
Was literally
Pokemon
just
and
thinking, my dude, I grew up in a small town in Oregon. And I mean,
Washington.
heyo, West Coast, Best Coast. But no, I grew up in this tiny town about an hour southeast of Portland. I was middle of the woods, okay? It was small. I say small, 3,000 people, but spread across like 50 miles of forest land, basically. So our town was very tiny, but people kind of just lived all around. But I remember when Harry Potter came out, my mom loves the Harry Potter books. And my mom has always been kind of witchy, you know? It is what it is. But I remember the community was like, "Oh, Harry Potter books, those are satanic." And my mom was just like, "No, they're not." The word witch or wizard is just automatically associated with Satanism or some
Mhm.
paganism, whatever. And I remember my bus driver of all people, she was like, I think she caught her daughter reading Harry Potter, or like her daughter was asking for her to buy Harry Potter, and she was just like, "No, no, 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 no. That is a bunch of satanic nonsense. You're not doing that." And same thing with Pokemon. It's fascinating because I just saw a video the other day that reaffirmed this. There was like a preacher talking about different Pokemon. This is again a video from the 90s. And he's like, "Pocket monsters? Are you
Mhm.
serious? Look at the symbols on these Pokemon. That's satanic. This is that." And it's like, it's not though. I think there is symbolism hidden in a lot of stuff. Of course, naturally. I mean, it is. Maybe the government is run by satanic lizard people. Who knows? But
Yes.
but I think Pokemon is just Pokemon. Really, I don't think there's much more going on there.
No, we had a teacher, and she was just a substitute. I didn't even know how she had this much power, but she found out that I remember this one kid because we were all terrified. My grandma bought me the Harry Potter series, like the first two books when I was a kid, and my mom couldn't care less about it, but she was afraid that the school would get really mad if I read them or if they found out that I had read them. So I didn't read them until I was well into my teenage years and was like, screw you for not letting me read this book, right? Because
Yeah.
this is ridiculous. But she found out that he had been playing Pokemon, and she had no relation to any of us, right? She's just this random substitute teacher who happened to be there for like quite a while. And she made everybody like practically pledge that we wouldn't read Harry Potter, that we wouldn't play Pokemon, and like write on the board that this was satanic. And I was just thinking, like, what? What? This is wild. And so, yeah, thinking back on some of this stuff when you like grew up in this time and you're just like, where did this even come from? Like, why? Did they change their minds now? Like, what are their like, it's ridiculous.
Dang, dude. You think fake news is bad now? It's the same stuff, same people buying into the same stuff, if you know what I mean. First of all, what happened to separation of church and state, bro? Let's chill out. Like, it's the school. We're
Right?
chilling.
Right?
But, like, okay, I would get if the kids are bringing like a Ouija board into class. I'd be like, hey, let's not,
Yeah.
or at least not here.
Mhm.
But Pokemon cards, Harry Potter, things like that, it's just astounding to me that people were led to believe what they were led to believe about it. It's like,
Exactly.
guys, you can be religious and still use critical thinking.
Hmm.
You can be religious and still be logical.
Hmm.
I don't even know. I don't want to paint myself in a corner here because yes, like there is real life witchcraft, people who practice witchcraft and all of that. There, but Harry Potter, I mean, you could take any subject that you would consider evil or whatever and make a parody or something lighthearted and entertaining about it. I mean, look at any horror movie.
Hmm.
You look at possession movies, slasher flicks. That's yes, it happens, but this is just for entertainment purposes, guys. Let's
Exactly.
relax.
Exactly. No, I remember growing up, it was so funny. I was thinking about this morning, and there was a movie, and probably one of the things that made me interested in possession and voodoo and all that. But I'll never forget, it was Skeleton Key with Kate Hudson, which was not a great film. I mean, rewatched it a little while ago. I was like, this wasn't so hot. But I was like, I wanted to watch it so bad when I was a kid. And my little sister and I, we loved horror movies, and we were never allowed to watch them. And we sneaked it on, we put it on the TV. We were watching it, and my mom came in, and oh my god, she was so mad. And I'll never forget, because we had this library. We converted our garage into a library. We had a TV in the corner, and we were cleaning in there and watching at the same time. And my mom came in, and she said, God is watching, and he knows what movie you have on right now. And my sister, because my sister never had a filter at all, she turned around to my mom and she said, I think he has a lot more on his plate than what we're watching. And I mean, she was like 7, like little, right? And I will never ever forget that. And but yeah, like my mom, my dad couldn't care less, but my mom would not let us watch horror movies because, she had this idea that obviously, it's bad, and maybe it's like that person who was talking about like Hocus Pocus. Was it Hocus Pocus that was going to come through your TV and like possess you? When Hocus Pocus 2 came out, and it was like all over Instagram, and she was like, it's gonna come through your TV, it was gonna possess you.
Oh, I never
My
heard
mom was
that.
never that bad, but it was
Right.
like she was pretty not pleased with horror films when we were kids.
Everyone listening or watching, we're going to take a little break. Be sure to tune in on the next episode where Hailey and I continue our wonderful conversation, where she continues to educate us and enlighten us, and we continue to discuss demonology. And also, we're going to dive into some of Hailey's own personal experiences with some spooky things.
Yes.
Anyway, everyone, listen next time.